we'll get started now. This is the, well, first of all, welcome to Tucson Festival of Books, although by this point, I should say thanks for coming to the Tucson Festival of Books, because it's almost over. This is the Minimalists, is the name of the program today. This room is sponsored by the City of Tucson and Rick Engineering. Anyone here from the City of Tucson or Rick Engineering we should wave at? Well, I guess it was sponsored by them. After the presentation today, there will be a signing in the signing area number 1. And instead of trying to rush up here, if you want to, with questions afterwards, which a lot of people like to do, the two authors will be led, as it were, over to that signing area, and you can have books signed and questions then if you'd like. My name's Frank Messia. Our two authors today are Joshua Millburn and Ryan Nicodemus. All that remains is their book, and it's a study of minimalism, so that's it. Go ahead, guys.
I'm going to stand up. Hello, thanks for coming out. Wow, thank you. My name is Ryan Nicodemus, and this is the Joshua Fields Millburn. And yeah, thanks so much for coming out. Josh is going to read from our new book. We are going to do some questions and answers. We got the mics there for it. But before we do that, I want to tell you guys a story about how we became the Minimalists, if you guys want to hear it. All right. I heard a couple of guesses, so I'm going to go with that. Thank you, sir. So I want everyone here to imagine your life a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. What do you think it will look like? Imagine a life with less stuff, less clutter, less stress and debt and discontent, a life with fewer distractions. Now imagine a life with more time, more meaningful relationships, more growth and contribution and contentment. A life of passion unencumbered by the trappings of the chaotic world around you. Well, what you're imagining is an intentional life. It's not a perfect life, not even an easy life, but a simple one. What you're imagining is a rich life, the kind of rich that has nothing to do with wealth. You know, it's funny, I used to think rich was earning $50,000 a year. That was my 18-year-old self. Then when I started climbing the corporate ladder in my early 20s, I quickly began earning 50 grand. But I didn't feel rich. Something went wrong. So I had to go back to the drawing board. And I figured out I didn't adjust for inflation. So maybe 65,000 was rich. Maybe 90,000. Maybe 6 figures. Or maybe owning a bunch of stuff. Maybe that was rich. Well, whatever rich was, I knew that once I got there, I would finally be happy. So as I made more money, I spent more money, all in the pursuit of the American dream, all in the pursuit of this thing called happiness. But the closer I got, the farther away happiness was. 5 years ago, my entire life was different from what it is now, radically different. I had everything I ever wanted. I had everything I was supposed to have. I had an impressive job title with a very respectable corporation. I managed hundreds of employees. I earned a 6-figure income. I bought a shiny new car every couple years. I owned a huge 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom condo. It even had 2 living rooms. I have no idea why a single guy needs 2 living rooms.
He had a cat.
I was living the American dream with a cat. Everyone around me said I was successful, but I was only ostensibly successful. You see, I also had a bunch of things that were hard to see from the outside. Although I earned a lot of money, I also had a lot of debt. But chasing the American dream cost me more than money. My life was filled with stress and anxiety and discontent. I was miserable. I may have looked successful, but I certainly didn't feel successful. And it got to a point where I didn't know what was important anymore. But one thing was clear. There was this gaping void in my life. So I tried to fill that void the same way many people do, with stuff. Lots of stuff. I was filling the void with consumer purchases. I bought new cars, new electronics, closets full of expensive clothes. I bought home furniture, expensive home decorations, and I always made sure to have all the latest gadgets. Oh, and when I didn't have enough cash in the bank, I paid for expensive meals, rounds of drinks, and frivolous vacations with credit cards. I was spending money faster than I earned it, attempting to buy my way to happiness. And I thought I'd get there one day eventually. I mean, happiness had to be somewhere just around the corner, right? But the stuff didn't fill the void. It widened it. And because I didn't know what was important, I continued to go further into debt, purchasing things that weren't making me happy. This went on for years. It was a terrible cycle. Lather, rinse, repeat. By my late 20s, my life on the outside, it looked great. But on the inside, I was a wreck. I was several years divorced. I was unhealthy. I was stuck. I drank a lot. I used drugs a lot. I used as many pacifiers as I could. And I continued to work 60, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week. And I forsook some of the most important aspects of my life. I hardly ever thought about my health or my relationships or thought about things that I was passionate about. And worst of all, I felt stagnant. I wasn't growing, and I certainly wasn't contributing. My life lacked meaning, purpose, passion. If you would have asked me what I was passionate about, I would have looked at you like a deer in headlights. What am I passionate about? I had no clue. I was living paycheck to paycheck, living for a paycheck, living for stuff, living for a career that I didn't love, but I wasn't really living at all. I was depressed. Then, sometime when I was approaching 30, I noticed something different about my best friend of 20-something years. Josh seemed happy for the first time in a really long time, like truly happy, ecstatic. But I didn't understand why, because we had both worked at the same corporation, side by side, throughout our 20s, both climbing the ranks, and he was just as miserable as me. To boot, he had just gone through two of the most difficult events of his life. His mother just passed away, and his marriage ended, both in the same month. He wasn't supposed to be happy, and he definitely wasn't supposed to be happier than me. So I did what any good best friend would do. I took Josh out to a nice lunch. We went to Subway. And I asked him a question while we were sitting there eating. I asked him, Josh, why the hell are you so happy? He spent the next 20 minutes telling me about this thing called minimalism. He talked about how he spent the last few months simplifying his life, getting the clutter out of the way to make room for what was truly important. And then he introduced me to an entire community of people who had done the same thing. He introduced me to a guy named Colin Wright. He was this 24-year-old entrepreneur who traveled to a new country every 4 months, carrying with him everything that he owned. Then there was Joshua Becker, a 36-year-old husband and father of 2 with a full-time job and a car and a house in suburban Vermont. Then there was Courtney Carver, this 40-year-old wife and mother to a teenage daughter in Salt Lake City. And there was this guy named Leo Babauta, a 38-year-old husband and father of 6 in San Francisco. Although these people were leading considerably different lives, people from different backgrounds with children and families and different work situations, I noticed that they all had at least 2 things in common. First, they were living deliberate, meaningful lives. They were passionate and purpose-driven. They seemed much richer than any of the so-called rich guys I worked